So growing up, my childhood was what I would have considered to be normal, but normal is what we have a tendency to be surrounded by. So I just thought that everyone had a childhood like me. Part of my childhood, from the age of quite young, I ended up in an orphanage, and there was a fair amount of stuff that happened in the orphanage that had a lasting impression on me for right up until my probably late 30s, mid to late 30s. I think the biggest thing though with what I experienced was when you end up in an orphanage but you've still got two healthy parents who are alive, there is a deep feeling of abandonment that goes hand in hand with that experience. And I think abandonment probably pre-framed the rest of my adult life with all of my relationships. So my solution to the problem of abandonment was to ensure that I never got close enough to anyone, that I liked them or loved them enough that if they ever left, it would have a negative impact on me. So I created relationships where I pretty much put in place situations where they would leave by their own choice because I kind of forced that situation to happen. And that mostly happened with personal romantic relationships. So that was kind of the experience that went through and created all the rest of my experiences in life. So abandonment is a super strange emotional thing to have because it's not prominent in your everyday thinking. It's just something that grinds away in the back of your mind and in your body. And it really doesn't come up until you're pushed, really emotionally pushed by something. And what I found with abandonment was that whenever an emotional situation arose where I was challenged, maybe by the fear of loss, instead of being honest about it, I would divert to aggression or victimization or some other behavior, anything that would avoid the concept of abandonment, of vulnerability. Aggression was a strange thing. So it's such a distance from where I am now, and it's quite strange to think back, but I remember that all my aggression was self-harming behavior. It was never directed at other people. There would be holes in the wall, for example. There would be broken things, but they tended to be mine. And reflecting on it, looking way back, it was always a feeling of frustration that drove the anger. So the anger came from frustration, and the frustration came from being a young person who couldn't find another way to communicate my inner thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And it came out as rage. So the strange thing about frustration and life and childhood trauma is that oftentimes it doesn't come out until you get a little bit older. So what I find really strange is that when I hit my 20s, I think I was about 25 years old, by then I'd had a lot of trouble as a youth. And I just narrowly kind of missed a lot of chances to end up in a worse situation. And I think a lot of that was because at the time I always worked. When I got to 25, I had this car accident and my dog died in the car accident. So there was huge loss there. And I decided that was it. It was time to change. And I went and started doing outdoor recreation. And what was really strange is that it was the peak of my life. I was fit, I stopped smoking, I'd got rid of all of my habits, I didn't drink, I was training in martial arts, doing all sorts of healthy stuff. And right towards the end of my time doing that, something changed. And I met a person who reminded me of my past growing up. And I slipped back into that, and for some reason found at my highest point of being my best self, there was a self-sabotage of medicating myself to numb out the pain that started coming back to me through association with a person who was probably more suited to a past of where I was 14 years old. The self-medication, it wasn't alcohol, it was drugs. I ended up with an addiction to Class A drugs, and more the type of drugs that are a downer than an upper. So mine was heroin addiction. I ended up going into it. I distinctly remember this little part of myself that was a little bit competitive, because people had said to me, whenever someone tries heroin, they're addicted the first time they try it. And I think maybe it was my arrogance at the time, because I was so fit and healthy that I just thought that wouldn't happen to me. And sure enough, 10 years later, I found out I was wrong. I was addicted for a whole 10 years. I think the longest period of my addiction that I had away from my addiction was 3 months, when I had to go and work in Australia, and I had to prove to my boss at the time that I was on a methadone program. This is the strange thing about trauma, right? So I'd been self-medicating the strongest painkiller that you can find for 10 years to mask a pain. And obviously when you take away the drug, the masking, you're still left with everything that was there, plus the 10 years of shit that you created. You know, you get off drugs, which is supposed to be so hard, but no one really talks about the hard part of resolving all of the stuff that you created, and then finding out that there's so much more to go. So stopping taking drugs is probably, I know it's hard, but it's the beginning of a journey. I failed. I failed many times in that journey. I went back on drugs, off drugs, on drugs. But it made sense because I've just been diagnosed with adult ADHD. So, unbeknown to me, my entire life, I've had I've had a dopamine deficiency in my brain. Yeah. The change occurred when a woman walked into my life, actually. To live two lives, there's a whole lot of lying that you have to do. To people around you, to family, to friends, and to yourself. Pushing people away is a big part of that. And always having the comfort of something else is something that you begin to rely on. So my life changed when a woman walked into my life, into my house, and I fell in love with her the moment I saw her. At the time, I couldn't tell you why. It was just a feeling I had. And the feeling didn't go away. She was in baggy grey track pants and a hoodie. And I saw through all of that and saw something else. And in that moment, I decided that with this person, I would tell the truth about everything of how I felt. And I, for the first time, got rid of my backstops. So backstops for me were people, women who were in place so that I could be emotionally disconnected. I had 3 of them at the time, Jess, Jessie and Jessica. And they were there so that I would never become overly attached to any one person, and I could live in the world without care for other people's feelings. And they were always in the background. So the first thing I did was contact them, and formally, for the first time in my life, I formally ended these relationships because I was sincere about the way I felt about my current wife. But there's a distinct time that I remember where, because we were challenged, I was challenged so much at the start of our relationship because we both had so much shit, so much baggage. My wife unwittingly frequently challenged my thoughts around abandonment. She was younger than me, she was beautiful, still is. She grew up in an environment where she couldn't make her own choices and decisions. She always had to have family around her, which meant that when she grew up, that she would want to be free and have freedom. And I grew up with abandonment issues, so if I fall in love, then I'm going to be clingy and needy. So for the first 3 years of our life together, we struggled with dealing with a lot of our past stuff. And we did it. The only way we got through it was through communicating honestly what we thought and felt about situations. And that was really hard. I honestly don't think I'd communicated properly since I was in an orphanage. The hardest thing for me was the honesty around my feelings, because there was always a risk of if I told the truth, or what I thought was the risk, was that if I told the truth about how I felt, if I showed my vulnerability, that I would potentially lose this person that I was falling in love with. But within there was this really weird realization that if I didn't say the truth of the situation and how I felt, then I would be unconsciously agreeing to something that I didn't believe in. And that would mean that I would be becoming a different person to who I actually was. Which would be weird. It would mean there would be a relationship between two people who weren't really themselves. They were avatars of themselves. And that would be bullshit. So we had an agreement, and the agreement was, no matter the situation, no matter the vulnerability, no matter the pain, that a simple phrase would work for us. That was, whenever we were considering speaking honestly, and if we had any doubt around it, we would say the phrase to ourselves, which was, I would rather be myself, standing alone, than to not tell the truth and be someone else standing beside you. If I was to give any advice on the journey that many people are on, it would be a couple of things. So, bearing in mind that when I was younger, I shut down with my communication, and for a long time. Progressively, over time though, I had learnt through exposure and experience how to communicate more effectively. And I did a lot of that through professional training. So I actually, I got trained by people from overseas. I learned how to speak. I didn't probably learn so much how to voice my own emotions, but I learned how to communicate better. It was over time that the emotional stuff started coming out. And what I found really cool about speaking emotionally is that it reframes a lot of what you surround yourself with. There'll be people who can't handle that, and those probably aren't the people that you need around you. So start small with communication and read books. A lot of the stuff I did was reading books. Back in the day, I read a lot of books. I was a reader, but you might not be a reader. But there are audiobooks that are fantastic. Things that challenge you and challenge your way of doing things and your way of thinking. Things that make you uncomfortable and make you grow a little bit. I know that standing on a stage in front of hundreds of people speaking, that in the early days was my challenge, just to communicate effectively in that way. But it took vulnerability, again, and that was okay. The other part, oftentimes I hear this thing around mental health and well-being that we should talk to our mates. Now, if there's anything that's kind of rung true through this experience that I've had, is that when we're at certain stages of our life, we are surrounded by reflections of who we are at that time. So, as I said, when I was growing up, I thought I was normal compared to all of the people around me. And I was, because all of the people around me were traumatized as well. So if I went to them and raised a problem or an issue, they would put that through their value system based off their trauma and normalize it. And that would happen through the stages of my life. So the only way to change that would be to speak to people who aren't in that cluster group that you've got around you. Your family are going to normalize everything. Your friends are going to normalize everything. You have them there unconsciously for a specific reason that backs up your current belief system. So going and talking to them about things isn't the greatest idea in the world. The best thing is to actually talk to someone who is not part of that. Someone who's impartial. Someone who doesn't have an invested interest in the outcome of your choices and your decisions. I mean, if you grow, they might lose you. And that is a fear that they might have that will stop them from actually being honest, because they'll be protecting themselves. They're at a different stage in their journey to you. If I want to get advice on how to save money, I don't go to people who are broke. You know, if I want to get advice on healthy, good, honest relationships, I don't go and talk to my single friends who have been through multiple marriages and are unhappy. I want to go to people who are highly skilled in the area of saving money because they have saved money. I want to go to people who are highly experienced in really good relationships and their children are healthy and all of their relationships are strong. Those are the kind of people that I want to talk to. But most of all, I need to talk to people who are outside of my influence group, who don't have a vested interest in the outcome of my choices, because they won't be impartial. Final thing is, the only thing I ever wanted to hear was, and this is what my wife did. She just said, no matter what happens, everything's going to be okay.